Okay, good morning. It's 8 o'clock here in Houston, Texas. So welcome to the second in a four-part webinar series that we are running, where we're looking at immediate response actions. So when an incident's occurred, we're talking through the 12 main steps that we go through to carry out an immediate response to whatever incident we face. My name's Tristan Barston, and I am the OSRL America's Principal Preparedness Solutions Advisor based in Houston, Texas. I'm very, very fortunate today to be joined by Sayed, who's one of our vastly experienced technical specialists based over in the Bahrain response base. Sayed, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tristan. My name is Sayed Alalawi. I've been with OSRL Response for about 2.5 years now. Started up as a responder and now working as a trainer and consultant. Done lots of spills from the hot summers in Saudi to the tropical climates in the Caribbean. And I've also joined some exercises with our clients and internally as well in the Middle East, in the United States, in the United Kingdom. And I come from a background of mechanical engineering. I've worked in the shipbuilding industry before that. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Saeed. And Saeed will be able to bring, like he said, his experience in practical response operations to this webinar. So as we go through, I'm sure everybody will have seen that your microphones have been muted. If you do have any questions, we will open the webinar up for questions at the end. But as we go through, if there's something that you would like clarification on, please type your questions into the chat and we will cover them as we go through. Okay, then, so let's make a start. So where are we at the moment? So like I said, this four-part webinar series is really concentrating on the 12 different steps that we carry out as we deal with the initial response to an incident. On the first webinar, we went through the actions that we would carry out when the incident occurs. That's the initial assessment and raising the alarm. Then the primary notifications. So notifications are different from raising the alarm. Raising the alarm is telling people in the immediate vicinity, hey, this has happened. These are the risks. You need to do this, whether it's evacuate, whether it's assist, whether it's move to a safe area. The primary notifications are who are we telling that this incident's happened and what do we expect them to do with that information? And then we moved on to the mobilizing of the response resources. And today, during the webinar, we're going to recap on the mobilizing response resources and then move on to the next three steps, which are the establishing the operations center. So where is the incident response going to be managed from? We're going to be looking at what we do when additional information comes in about the incident and how that changes our actions, our goals, and our objectives. And then based upon that new information, how we're going to assign the tasks to our resources, to our response personnel to make sure that we achieve those goals. So, like I said, we're going to go through a recap of the mobilization process first of all, because it's very important for us to understand that our response resources don't miraculously materialize at the location where they're needed. There is a process that we have to go through and therefore a time delay before these resources can be deployed. And we're going to look at that now. So, Sayed?
Thank you, Tristan. So yeah, like Tristan said, we hopefully have heard about the incident. We raised the alarm, we assessed the situation, we made the primary notifications. So now is the time to start thinking about how we're going to mobilize our equipment. So first and foremost, we have to assess the situation. So what kind of spill do we have, how big it is, the severity, the location. Are there any things that we need to keep in mind? Are there any hazards that we need to keep in mind at this point before sending any people or resources over to that spill location? And then once we have that, we start thinking about the mobilization. So we check our inventory. What kind of equipment do we have? We usually have tier one equipment. We usually keep them maintained every 6 months, every 1 year. These equipment will be ready to be deployed as fast as possible to the spill location. So we check what equipment we have. Once we know what we have, we start to, based on the incident type, we start to compile a list of what we need to send. And once we have that, we start to plan the logistics. So basically how we're going to transport the equipment from point A to point B being the spill location. So once we have that in mind, we start to load out our equipment. And a very important thing to keep in mind before starting to load the equipment is to prepare the equipment. What do we need? What do we mean by that? Basically, it's true that we have maintained equipment. However, there might be something that went wrong with them before in between maintenance schedules. So it's important on the day of sending the equipment to check, basically put some fuel in the pump and run it for a few minutes, check the skimmer if it's working or not. Just a very fast functional test and making sure that it's ready for use. Once we do that, we start to load our equipment into the designated vehicles. So we might have a list of the designated vehicles beforehand. This comes in hand when we're doing the preparedness phase of a project or of a spill. Sometimes we have a response trailer, which we're going to talk about in the next slide, but sometimes we have a rapid response trailer that we're going to be able to deploy as fast as we can. This trailer will have all the equipment that we need for the specific spill. If not, we can, or if we do have equipment, it's time to think about how we're going to transport it to the site. So basically, is it going to be by plane, by a car? Do we need to do any customs or any of that? And next, once we have both the equipment and the personnel on the site, it's time to think about how we're going to start our operations while keeping safety in mind. So basically, doing our toolbox talk, because when you think about it, most of the times people that are working on a spill haven't worked together before. So it's important. You might have some volunteers, for example, coming in to aid with the spill. So it's important that everyone is on the same picture before starting the operations. That's when the operational briefing comes in hand as well. You want everyone to know what's being done and where it's being done. You don't want anyone to try. You don't want any unexperienced people to experiment with things. That's why safety briefing is important. And then you have your personal protective equipment. So that's basically, depending on the situation, do we need any hard hats? Do we need, most of the time people have to wear a hard hat, safety glasses, chemical gloves. And based on the situation, you might need some Tyvek suits or disposable suits. And once you have that in mind, you start thinking about controlling the access to the spill site. So a lot of times you might have unhappy parties from the community or from the public. So, or people who are just curious to know what's going on. So you want to limit access to your spill site. You want only the people that have to be there, because you don't want any people to mess around with the operations and maybe take you back a little bit by causing an incident. And then last but not least, we need to start to set up and deploy our equipment. So basically, most of the times we have a very limited amount of equipment. So we want to be strategic with the placement of our equipment. You want to basically have the right amount of equipment, nothing more, nothing less, because if you have more, you might overcrowd the area. You might cause a hazard by doing that. And one thing to also keep in mind is that you want to deploy your equipment in a place, but you don't want to damage the environment. While doing so, you don't want to cut trees. You don't want to damage the fauna in the place. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And before we end up with this process, it's important to, at this stage, to start thinking about demobilization. I'm not saying starting to do the paperwork, but to actually start to think about how we're going to take this equipment out of the place, because eventually that time will come. So yeah, that's some things to keep in mind. Back to you, Tristan.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sayed. And just to reiterate that point, I'm sure many people are aware, we had Hurricane Beryl come through the Caribbean and Texas, parts of Louisiana at the start of the week. Many people managed to survive the impact of the hurricane very well. But then the cleanup process and the recovery process, people wanted to get out there and do things, which is absolutely admirable and needs to be done. However, there is more risk of people injuring themselves. Even here in Texas, people want to get out, clean up tree branches, make sure fences are fixed, things like that. And once that hurricane has passed through, the temperatures are back up into the high 90s, so around 40 degrees Celsius for everybody else in the world. And heat stroke becomes an issue. So those safety measures that Sayed mentioned are very important to think about. But let's look at some of the tier one response resources that are typically available to us or should be available to us. Now, the actual type of equipment in our tier one package will be very risk based. So what is our oil spill risk? What products are we dealing with? What area are we working in? That really drives the equipment that you have. But there are certain elements to our tier one response package that are universal. So we spoke about the response resources, the booms, the skimmers, the temporary storage, the anchors, the warning signs. All those types of equipment are based upon what our risk is, the type of product we're going to spill, the amount of product we potentially could spill, and the area that could be impacted. Moving on from that, we need to have these resources positioned in a location where their access is easy for us to get to at any time of the day or night, and also that they're maneuverable. We can take them to the location that we're needed. Sayed mentioned this. We have some rapid response trailers. I believe we have some in the Bahrain base. Is that correct, Sayed?
Yep, correct. We have one.
Yep. So we have one in the Bahrain base. And that's because we know that when an oil spill happens, it's not going to impact the base itself. We're going to need to take the equipment from that base to where it's needed. Response trailers are a great tool for this. We can hook them up quickly to the back of a pickup truck and move them to wherever they're needed to go. Sayed also mentioned it's vitally important to regularly inspect and maintain our tier one equipment to make sure that when we need it, it's ready to go. Far too many times we go and do capability reviews or exercises or drills at facilities, and they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on their response equipment, which they've then put in a shipping container and forgotten about. So when it comes time to use it, even for an exercise, nobody can find a key. There's 14 other pieces of equipment in front of the shipping container even before we can open the doors. Once we have opened the doors, it's now become basically rat city. So, and various animals are now living in the equipment that we want to use. And then also the extreme temperatures or cold, depending on the environment that you're working on, has a huge impact. So if you're going to be spending this money on this response equipment, it's really vital that you have a maintenance program to make sure that when you need it, it's available to you. And tied into that is making sure that your personnel are trained in the use of the equipment. That's why with All-Spill Response, when we hire or loan equipment to our member organizations, you don't just get a big box full of nice shiny equipment. Along with that big box of nice shiny equipment, you get a maintenance program and a training program. We send technical responders to you that not only do the maintenance on a regular basis, but then they also train the personnel who will be the initial users of that equipment. And that last point, that simulate the spill scenarios to practice deployment and response. Drills and exercises, sometimes it's really nice to go and do a shoreline response on a beautiful flat beach. Perhaps there's somewhere where there's bathrooms and facilities to get drinks and everything nearby. And it's a lovely day out for everybody. But you know as well as I do that that is not where you're going to respond. You're going to respond to some hard to reach area where access is difficult, where the location is very hard to deploy your equipment. And that's where you need to train. You need to train in the hard to reach areas to make sure that if an incident happens, you're prepared and you're not caught out. So we've spoke about what we can do. We've spoken about, we know that there is a step-by-step mobilization process that takes time. We know the importance of having this equipment package ready to go with trained personnel. But how do we tie that all together to make sure that we are fully aware that if we have an incident, these are the steps and this is how long it's going to take? And we do that by building a preparedness response time model. Sayed, would you like to talk through this for us, please?
Yeah, sure, Tristan. So basically what you see in front of you is a response time model. For this scenario, we've chosen a spill that requires surface response resources from one of our bases. That's the Fort Lauderdale base in the United States. So in this scenario, we need to send both personnel and equipment to a spill that's in the St. John city, which is in Canada. As you can see in front of you in the first line, the first green line, day one, that's hour 0. That's the time we receive the notification call. The duty manager usually picks up and asks for the notification and mobilizations forms. Once those are completed, you can see below in hour 1, the duty manager starts to gather the resources, all the details, starts to make plans to gather the strike team. So basically, that's the technical advisor team that we can mobilize rapidly to anywhere in the world. Some of you might know that, but if you don't, we have a team of responders that are available 24/7. They can be at the nearest airport within 1 hour. So, and we have a service that's the 5x5 service, where for members we can send 5 responders to for 5 days, basically free of charge. Now, in this scenario, we've deployed or mobilized a technical advisor team. And in the next line, you will see that in hour 2, they will depart from the Fort Lauderdale base, and you'll see that it will take them 10 hours to reach Canada, basically, the spill location. Now, this time is a planned duration. Most of the times, maybe sometimes it will take 10 hours, but sometimes it will take more based on things like flight availabilities, weather conditions, or visas. For this scenario, people traveling from the States don't need a visa, so they will reach the destination in hour 1. After that, you will see that the response department, the duty manager team, starts to identify the type of resources needed for this scenario. And then they will start to source an aircraft to send the resources. So basically equipment that are going to be used in the spill. This part will take some time because usually customs will take some time and you might need to wait for the office to open or something. So We've projected that it will take 12 hours. So meanwhile, once the team of responders arrive on the site in the spill location, what they're going to do is they're going to start to train the personnel over there, because most of the times you will have volunteers, people who it's their first spill. So while the equipment arrives to the site, our responders, our team of technical advisors will use this time to train the personnel so that once the equipment is there, they're going to start to do response activities immediately. If we go down a little bit, we will see that the equipment have cleared the customs and have arrived in Canada in day 2, hour 8. That the activities will not start right then, because for this scenario, we identified that the team of technical advisors have done some shoreline assessments, have done some assessments to, and that led them to requesting for additional personnel for this scenario. So basically, to make the long story short, it's going to take about 56 hours. If you can see the last line, where from the minute the duty manager receives the call to the minute the actual response activities start, it took them 56 hours for this scenario, which is kind of a realistic scenario. You might have times where you need less time, but in this instance, we needed 56 hours. And based on this model, if we receive a call in the future from a person in Canada or wherever in the world, we can transport the study that we did to them, that it's going to take us this time to be at your location, just to manage expectations, basically.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sayed. And one of the important reasons why we do this, like Sayed said, is to understand how long it's going to take us to get there to start response operations on an oil spill response limited side. It allows the member to know, okay, we need to do or have a plan to do something for those first 2 operational periods, because we know we only have the resources immediately available to us. The tier 3 or even the tier 2 response doesn't get here or doesn't start working until day 3. Also, it allows us to identify the bottlenecks. So where are the possible areas that will slow us down? Sayed mentioned a couple of these, especially when it comes to getting customs clearance for response equipment entering a country. And a lot of the work that I do, and I know Sayed does as well, is to identify the regulations of bringing personnel and equipment into a country, and then what we can do beforehand to make sure that that process is expedited so we can move that equipment through as quickly as possible. Now, there can be challenges in some area. My last major response was actually in Libya. So there was no way that we could move equipment into Libya and then to the response site quickly. And what it ended up we had to do is identify that we would run our operations from Malta, which was an EU country, a lot easier for us to get into, and then carry out our response from there. It added a little bit of time on, another 16 hours, in fact, but if you compare the 16 hours extra moving time to the 1 or 2 weeks of equipment being stuck in the Libyan customs, there was a trade-off. So we had to choose the best option for us. Okay, so we've spoken about that initial response. So if you put it in medical terms, we've had an injury, we've made a quick assessment of the injury, and we've put a band-aid or a bandage on it. The next step that we have to do is we have to start managing that operation. We've made our immediate physical response, we've done our actions, we've carried out our planned steps, but what we're looking at doing now is managing that instant. If we think about it, there's a reactive and a proactive way of managing these incidents. We've done our reactive. We've seen the problem. mobilized our resources. We're starting to control the incident as much as possible. Now we need extra assistance and people to start planning what we're going to do next. And a key element of this is setting up our Emergency Operations Center, also known as an EOC. Sayed, would you like to go through this slide?
Yeah, sure. So basically, like Tristan said, now is the time to start thinking about where we're going to take our decisions. So the EOC is basically where the decision makers will be. That's where they're going to do their training, their meetings. That's where they're gonna communicate. They're gonna coordinate all the response activities. There you're gonna have all your involved parties. So basically the environmental agencies, your technical advisors. So us, oil spill response, will be there. And basically, when we try to think about allocation for this EOC, we want to make sure that it's close enough to the spill site. So because the incident commander and the people from the IMT staff will be frequenting the spill sites, but we want to make sure that it's close enough, but not too close, because we want to make it as safe as possible for them to be there. We want it to be out of the hazard zone, in the cold zone. And it's important to keep in mind that sometimes you might have a small spill. So basically a short shoreline, 2 kilometers, you can have the EOC outside there. But in some instances, you might have a number of locations, 20 locations, and you want to strategically place the EOC maybe in the middle to allow all the parties to be able to come without any hassle. And the initial size and the facilities, you want the EOC to be large enough. You want to be able to scale it up or down based on your needs. So if the incident escalates, you want to be able to have more room for people who are going to join the IMT. But also, if you start to demobilize, you want to take from the room and make it compact, because you don't need all the space. And you want to make sure to think about the well-being of the people who are going to be there. You're going to have people working possibly weeks, months in this operations center. So you want to think about the restrooms, your break rooms. I've come across one EOC here in Bahrain where they have in the second floor, they have rooms for people to sleep in, because at the end of the day, people might be fatigued. So it's a good idea to have them sleep nearby so that they don't have to commute every day, especially when they're fatigued. Another thing is having break rooms or private rooms. We're going to talk in the next slide about why we need that, but basically you don't want, there are going to be a lot of people in the EOC, so you want people to be able to go out and do their thing and then come back and present to the rest of the personnel. And the next important thing we talked about earlier, security and access. There are going to be a lot of talks in this room. A lot of the things that are going to be talked about in this room shouldn't necessarily go out to the public. You want to control the information. That's why only the people that have to be there must be there. You want to control the rumors. You don't want anything to spread out. And the other thing is that you need to clearly identify the EOC. You're going to have a lot of contractors, people who are the first time it is for them to come to this site. So you want to make it clear that that's the EOC. The EOC is basically the place that when you have a problem, that's where you need to go to. So you have to make it clear that from a very far area, or everyone involved in the spill must know the location of the EOC. And next up, we have the infrastructure. So basically, we want to make sure that we have the right technology in place. We want to have the right, we want to have monitors, printers, HVAC. So basically, some of the spills that I went to, it's hot out there and you need to have some air conditioning, things that we don't think about, but cold water, because when you're responding, you want to come back to the EOC and be able to have a break and take some time off, you know. Next, we have the general equipment. So we should have internet access, cellular, maybe network amplifier if it's in an isolated area. You want to have your printers because you're going to print a lot of forms. And the other thing is briefing equipment. So you're going to have a lot of people who are new to the site. So it's good to have flip charts, whiteboard to start briefing them on what you need to do. In a nutshell, that's why we need an ERC.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sayed. And apologies for dropping that slide in on you there right at the last minute. So, as Sayed said, an EOC is very, very important. Now, when we look at pictures like this, we see big EOCs that have been set up beforehand, probably for a major organization. But as Sayed mentioned, talking through that last slide, we've also seen ad hoc EOCs run out of things like vehicles or shipping containers, especially during those early phases of a response operation. So when we look at pictures like this, I don't want people to get overwhelmed with the complexity of, everything's laid out prettily, and, we have screens and clocks. There's just certain elements that we need to make sure that we have for our emergency operations center. Now, there's four main parts to it. So regardless, if we have a nice room with ensuite coffee and bathrooms and things like that, there's still four main elements that we have to have. Firstly, the main command center. This is the heart of our emergency operations center. So this is where the decision makers stay. This is where that common operating picture can be found. This is where all the information that we're gathering about that incident is sent to, collated, and a picture of what is happening is formed in that main command center. Talking about gathering all that information, we want to make sure through drills and exercises that our people or our contractors or anybody involved in the site is able to communicate between them effectively. One of the famous examples from 9/11 was that the radios the fire service used were not on the same bandwidth as the radios that the police were using, which means that they could not communicate between themselves. If you can imagine that, trying to respond to an incredibly impactful incident and you're unable to communicate with somebody who's working alongside you. So that's one of the key things that we have to make sure that everybody can communicate, whether we're using the incident command system, whether we're using the incident management system, whether we're using something else. That flow of communication is absolutely vital for us. Also, we've spoken about this main command center where all the information's coming in, and we have that common operating picture. Tied into that, we need break rooms for working groups. We want to keep that main command center as free of people as possible. It's only there when people need to brief the incident commander or the incident commander needs to make those important decisions about where we are going with this response. The actual work, the management, the logistics, the finance, the planning needs to be done somewhere else. Otherwise, we're all going to be tripping over each other's feet, shouting, and it's going to descend into chaos. We want to keep it as calm as possible. So breakout rooms are really important so people can go away and do what they need to do somewhere else and come back with the results. And then tying it all together is flexibility and adaptability. All too often, we can get blinkered focusing in on what we think is a priority. What we need to understand is the response to an incident can change very, very quickly. And it could be that all of a sudden we need to increase our logistics team. because whatever equipment we're bringing in or whatever challenge we have has changed. We've seen this with the impacts from Hurricane Beryl, where normal access routes for response equipment into these islands is now closed. We can't fly in equipment like we used to through fixed wings. We can't bring it into the port. We've got to bring it in a different way on landing craft, on helicopters, and we have to adapt our response to the situation that we face. So how do OSRL deal with this? Sayed, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So basically, when we have a spill, we have the duty manager assisting the client from the United Kingdom, Singapore, or the United States. But on the field, we have people who are working closely to the client, people who are working close to the operations, the planning. And in the start, we have the oil spill response manager. So we have what we call an in-country lead. He's going to work directly with the incident commander. He's going to provide technical advice, provide his technical expertise. And we will also have people who are going to be providing support to the safety officer, the information officer. And we're going to have people who are going to offer support and work close to the operations section chiefs, the planning section chiefs, the logistics section chiefs. What we don't offer is people working as the incident commander. So that's going to be from the client, from the member. We're going to work closely to the incident commander and the safety officer, but we're going to not take that role. What we are going to have or offer is people who are working in the field doing SCAT, which is shoreline surveys, waste management plans, dispersed monitoring, all of that technical, specifically type of work. But yeah, we're going to offer technical support whenever and wherever we need it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sayed. So yes, for your drills and especially for any incident that you have, early communication is an absolute boon for us at Allspill Response. The more time that we have to prepare, the more time that we have to arrange the specific assistance that you need, the better. You know, you might not think that leaving it 12, 24 hours makes a big impact, but as you can see, if it's going to take us 56 hours to get to your location, that 12-hour delay can have a huge impact on our arrival time, and then that has a huge impact on how effective we are in dealing with the incident. Okay, so we spoke about those initial responses, mobilizing our team and setting up our emergency operations center. So now we're going to look at that flow of communication on how we're updating our incident management team or the people in that emergency operations center, how we're keeping them informed on what is happening, and then how that information is going to be used to make sure that they adapt and change the response operation to meet the needs of the response. So we do that using a basic spill impact mitigation assessment. And I know what you're all thinking. You're sat there thinking, Tristan, you honestly expect us, when an incident's happened, to sit down and fill out a form? And in the vast majority of cases, no. However, we use these forms not in the vast majority of cases. What we do is we use this for our drills and our exercises to make sure that people understand what are the 4 key elements that I need to assess here. What is the information that I need to gather and pass on to the management team, with the understanding that this information is probably not available to us immediately, that we are going to have to fill this form or gather this information in with the best of our knowledge so far, and understand that we can make updates to it as more information is available. So let's have a look at those four main elements. So we have the first element. This is the common to all incidents. We're looking at where the incident has happened, when the incident's happened, the spilt product type. Is it oil? Is it hazardous materials? Is it plastic granules? Estimated amount of release. Now, this is a tricky one, especially for organizations that people work in that have set limits on what amount of what quantity of product needs to be reported. I've seen this in several organizations where they've said, if we have a spill of less than 1 barrel, you don't need to report it. And then all of a sudden, magically, 95% of the incidents are under that 1 barrel, regardless of how much has actually been spilt. So it's very difficult to accurately look at an impacted area and think, okay, that is a 1 barrel spill, that is a 10 barrel spill. So rather than doing the estimated amount of release, if it's difficult for us to gather that information, do an estimated area of impact. So if we're stood at a river and we look down the river and we can see that the oil is stretching 2 kilometers, so a mile down that river, and it's impacted, 5 meters, what's that, 7 yards, 21 feet up the bank, put that information down. That would be more helpful to our emergency management team than we've lost half a barrel of product. So understanding what that impact site looks like, and then tied into that is any safety concerns to deal with the product. And we get this by looking at, if it's available, our SDS sheets, but also using our own senses. Are there strong smells there? Is there a risk of fire if it's a light product? What operations are going on around us? Do outside personnel or the general population have access to that area? So what are our safety concerns for sending people and resources into that area? Then the next area that we're looking at is what has actually been impacted by that incident. Is it contained on our facility, or is it left our facility? What are our sensitive sites around us, or other operations? Do we have to close our own operations down, or do our neighbor operations and another organization, another company, do they need to close down? And how are we going to communicate that? Then the third area, we're going to look at what are we actually doing right now to deal with this incident, and how effective are we being, and what assistance do we need to make it more effective? And then last but not least, the planning and briefing aid. The whole reason that we do documents like this is to gather the information and then communicate that information to others. And the best way that I've personally found of doing that is through sketches, to make sure that we have a briefing aid that we can refer back to. If you give people a form and it's all filled out in, tiny little handwriting, and there's lots of information, and this is doing an early response where people are just goal focused, target focused, they're not going to spend the time reading this document. But you give them a sketch and you mark off, this is the impacted area, this is the source, this is where we're putting our resources, this is our access. People are going to look at that and understand that. So we have to engage with the emergency management team, our incident management team, in a way so that the information we're giving them can be understood. And if people are planning on running drills and exercises this year, please engage with us, and I'll come and I will bring my form with me and I'll make you fill it out 17 million times until it becomes second nature to you. Okay, so We've mobilized our initial response resources. We've established our incident management or emergency operations center, and we are making sure that we are getting a constant flow of information from the response site. It's being updated all the time, so our incident management team can start making the decisions on what needs to be done. And we do that by setting goals and then identifying who is going to do the tasks to achieve those goals. Sayed, would you like to talk more about that, please?
Yeah, sure, Tristan. So now we're trying to transition from the reactive to the proactive phase. So first, let me try to explain the difference between them. We've responded to the spill. We have our people working, responding to the spill, but everyone is everywhere. We need to try to make a process in place where everyone is kind of cool, calm, and collected. For that, to reach that phase, we need to have objectives. Based on those objectives and the priorities of our objectives, we will have a process that's going to be much more efficient and effective than what we have in the reactive phase, because in the reactive phase, everyone is trying to do as much as they can, as fast as they can to control. But in the proactive phase, it's much more planned and much more studied. So in an incident command system or an incident management system, we have a structure that's basically your command staff, your general staff, and then the task forces or the strike teams. The command staffs are your decision makers. So these are the people who coordinate the response. They make sure that the communication is being taken care of. And then you have your general staff. These are the people who take care of all the aspects of the operations. So from responding to managing resources and logistics or planning strategies. And below them are people who work closely to them, but are more specialized. They have more technical expertise in certain areas. So you have your cleanup teams, your shoreline assessment teams, and everyone works together, but everyone have certain objectives and tasks that at the end serve one purpose. So to identify these objectives, we have certain principles that we follow. We have a principle or a term called SMART. I'm sure a lot of you have come across that because it's internationally recognized. But SMART is basically, SMART stands for, S stands for specific, M for measurable, and A for achievable, R for relevant, and T for time-bound. So when we have clear objectives that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, it's much easier to assign tasks. And 1 second. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
You okay there, sir?
Yeah, all good. Thank you. Sorry about that. Once we have SMART objectives, it's important to prioritize our objectives. And for that, we use a term called PAIR. That's your people, environment, asset, and reputation, which we're going to cover in the next slide. But let's take, for example, on your right-hand side, we have set an objective in these scenarios. We have the first one, ensure the safety and health of response personnel and the general public. That's a people-related objective. You can see that it's specific. So we have to ensure the safety and health of the personnel. So that's specific. Is it measurable? Yes. At the end of the day or at the end of the operational period, if you have 0 casualties, then you've achieved this task or objective. Is it achievable? Yes. In our core values, we all want to achieve a safety or operations that follow safety. So it is achievable. Is it relevant? Correct. The only thing that I would add is maybe time bound. Most of the times you try to meet all the SMART principles. In this case, we can add maybe at all times at the end of our objective, so ensure the safety and health of response personnel and the general public at all times. This will make it smart. We can take another example, contain, recover, or disperse any contained spilled oil or other hazardous materials. As you can see, it's a little bit vague. Contain, recover, disperse. It's not specific. So we can make it specific by only saying contain or recover. And yeah, based on that, we can set tasks that serve our purpose, but that are clear, that task forces can take and try to apply on their own. Yeah, I don't know if Tristan have anything to add.
No, that was very well explained. Thank you, Sayed. A lot of this information that you see on the screen is done during the planning phase. So we put these together as a table to remind people of the areas that we need to focus on. And then if an incident happens, we can choose the different elements. Is this applicable to us? If it is, let's use it. Let's make it more specific, like Sayed said, and then work our way through that process. If it's not applicable to us, then we can discard it. It's not something that we have to worry about. For example, that unified command, if it's a small incident and we are managing it within our organization, unified command is not an issue for us. So we can ignore that. But this really helps us during the planning phase to understand that if the worst thing happens, what are those 10 key objectives that we need to start thinking about? And what can we do beforehand to make sure that we can effectively and efficiently meet those goals, those objectives? How can we start assigning the different tasks to the different groups? If we use something like the incident management or incident command system, that's then relatively straightforward for us. We know which groups we've got. We need a shoreline cleanup assessment. We have a shoreline cleanup assessment group. We need wildlife assessment. We have a wildlife group. We need aerial dispersant. We have an aviation group that we can give those objectives to. We can task them with meeting those objectives, and they will come back to us with a solution. Drills and exercises are absolutely key to making sure that what we think is going to happen actually happens. Both Sayed and I write a lot of emergency response or tactical response plans, but we do so in isolation, both in Bahrain. Sayed has a nice air-conditioned office in Bahrain. I have a nice air-conditioned office in Houston. That's a million miles away from some of the planned operational sites that we are writing about. So we make a lot of assumptions. And if we don't test those assumptions with drills and exercises, then those plans aren't going to be as effective as they can be. Okay, so we've come to the end of today's webinar. We've looked at 4 steps in this process, this mobilizing response resources. We've looked at what resources we need immediately available to us. We've looked at the importance about storing them, about transporting them, about training and maintaining on them. And we understand that there is going to be delay between the notification we've had this incident and the resources arriving at where they need to be. We've looked at how we're going to set up our emergency operations center, where our management team is going to sit. What resources do they need, whether it's in a nice office all laid out, or if it's a vehicle on site? What are the key elements that we need to have available to them? We've also looked at how we're going to keep that management team updated with the most accurate information from that site, understanding that the objectives, the goals that we are going to set, or the management team is going to set, are based on that information that they're getting. And those objectives and those goals will change as the information is updated and improved. And then last but not least, we looked at how we can prepare, how we can identify what are some likely goals that we would have to set, and then what groups are available to us that we can task with achieving those goals. The next webinar is going to be in September the 12th, where we're going to move on and look at the next 3 steps in our emergency or immediate response process, where we're going to monitor how effective are we being at the moment. Like life, we don't want to carry on doing something if it's not working for us. So how do we assess that it's working or not working? How do we change or improve what we're doing? We're also going to look at the importance about logging what we're doing, our decision-making process. And this is absolutely key, especially in incidents like the Tobago response earlier this year, where there is no responsible party. And then we will be looking to funds, or insurance to pay for the response, because the funds, the insurance, these agencies will need to understand exactly what we've done, why we've made the decisions we've made, and how effective that's been. So we're going to look at how we log our activities. And then we're going to look at how we communicate, how we can communicate what we're doing internally, but then also externally, how we use media. Okay, so thank you very, very much for your attention today. I understand that there'll probably be some questions, but we only have 5 minutes for questions now. But you can reach out to OSRL Response, to myself. You'll see my email up there on the left-hand side, Tristan Barston at allspillresponse.com, or directly to Sayed, whose email address is below mine. The Houston office, we have 4 personnel here in the Houston office, the technical advisors. We can help you and assist you, but also our duty manager personnel. So if you have any questions relating about the information or just oil spill preparedness in general, please let us know. We're also active on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. You can also go on our website, which is allspillresponse.com. There will be a recording of this webinar posted on that website. There's also other webinars, training courses, and information that you can find on that site as well. Okay, so if nobody has any questions, I think we'll finish today. Again, thank you very, very much for your attention today, Sayed. It's always a pleasure working with you, sir. I appreciate you staying late.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you back over in this part of the world soon, but just for training, obviously, not for an actual incident.
Yeah, my pleasure.